Good, Nora? All right. I got a new helper because somebody had to go back to college. Owen's hopefully going to be watching this on YouTube since he's not here. I think it's hitting me harder this one than, like, last year, it was, the first year hit Leslie hard. This year, I don't know. I'm having to deal with more with, like, we were, like, playing, like, games together at home and stuff, and now, like, he's been doing the computer stuff, and he also brings Nora in on Sunday morning so we can come early for practice, and then he comes later, and, he's sort of like the pickup of what we can't take care of, he's taking care of. Like, oh, man, I'm really missing that now. But Nora's taking over. She got the mail this morning. She's rocking it. Roman sandwiches. This is our last Roman sandwich. We've done, if you recall, law and righteousness, sin and death, Jews and Gentiles, which last week was Jews and Gentiles. If you recall, we had a nice little debate about whether or not hot dogs were sandwiches. And it was brought up to me after the service, it was brought up to me that it doesn't have to be meat. It could be other things inside of the bread and still be a sandwich. That part I will qualify. That's not what makes a hot dog a sandwich. A hot dog is a sandwich because it is in between the bread. And that can be proven from our really shabby Facebook poll that was put online of only 3 people answering, but all 3 people said, yes, a hot dog is a sandwich. So if you disagreed, you should have been logged into Facebook to fight your fight. It's too late now, though. So every one of our sandwiches has had a non-sandwich related thing that made it kind of an analogy and a connection. This week, the final week, is not going to be any different. And while we are talking symbolically about sandwiches as connections of words, there is also always a lesson involving a sandwich that I'm tying in. So it's symbolic sandwiches and real sandwiches at the same time, and some way that it gives like wisdom or insight from an actual sandwich, which is something you probably never thought you would ever come to church to get a lesson from a real sandwich. But you got me, so there you go. I have learned a lot of lessons in my life from sandwiches, as you can tell. Most of them are private lessons that are learned as far as what I don't like, what I do like, how many things I will put on a sandwich, how many things I won't, when I should slow down and chew more, what my body doesn't like as far as digestively, things that it doesn't agree with. But I've also learned one sandwich lesson, and it's going to be the lesson we share today, that is related to more than just me. It's not an individual lesson learned from a sandwich. I've learned a lesson from a sandwich for a whole group of people. In fact, I never found a limit on the number of people that it related to. So if you knew sort of my history with ministry, I started as a youth minister. I was a full-time youth minister at a couple different churches. Or some of them we were just volunteers, whatever. We've been involved as a couple. We've been involved in several youth ministries. And most of them were groups of 10 to 20 kids. We'd meet in our living room or wherever we could find to meet. Compared to the other youth minister friends of mine that I had from mega churches with 75 to 100 kids or more, we felt minuscule, but it was okay. And we didn't have the cool meeting spaces like they did, or like the arcade games standing in the corner and the bouncy houses everywhere. And we were just hanging out and enjoying being together. But when we would go to youth group events, like big arena-style worship sessions with thousands of students, hundreds of churches meeting together to do worship together as one big corporate worship group as a youth group together. It didn't matter that we were 15 and they were 175. We were all one group together in that space. We were all equal on that one arena floor. And although we all fit into the congregation together, we are still individuals who are human beings who have hunger and other things as needs. And these conventions go all day long or all week long in some cases. So imagine just being downtown at the Duke Energy Center with 25,000 teenage kids, and they say, okay, now it's lunchtime. You have an hour, and you're downtown, and the convention center only has 2 food courts, or two things in their food court. Lunch is going to be chaos. It is going to be horrible. No matter what everybody could ever agree on, if they could even agree, You're never going to have everybody in your whole group, 10, 50, 100, whatever kids you have, they're not all going to agree to one thing. We know that. And even if they did, it wouldn't matter because you wouldn't be able to tell whose line is what, because it's just one big chaotic mess of people standing around a restaurant waiting for food, and they only have an hour to do it. Well, we would go to these every year, and you go through the same process of like, oh man, how are we going to find the time in this hour to get food? And some people would try to like bring stuff in, but you had to keep it with you because you couldn't like go back out to a car and come back in. Everything was parked really, really far away. So you had to figure out a way to make this work. And after the third or fourth time, I got wise, and I realized every convention that we ever went to was about a block and a half away from a Subway. There was a Subway restaurant that existed because they were everywhere. I mean, like Subway was like the fastest growing chain in America. There would be a Subway restaurant within maybe 2 blocks at most from wherever the convention center was. And if I were to call them 2 days in advance, Subway could make for me something that would solve my lunch problems totally for my entire group. I started ordering party subs. Party subs are great. Party subs are wonderful. They don't require lots of work or energy. You don't have to assemble things. You don't have to keep a container with mayonnaise, a container with tomatoes, a container with lettuce, and a container with cheese, and like find a way to carry them all into where you're going. You just have this big sandwich in a box, and you just say, here it is, everybody. Here's your big sandwich. And it's amazingly always perfect. It always works, and it always feeds them. And it didn't matter how many kids we had. It always ended up being what we needed when we needed it. And I would always follow this formula because there's a difference. You can do like the catering style. There's like Subway where you order, like say, I have 20 kids, I need food for 20 kids, and they'll say, well, here's 20 pieces of bread and 20 pieces of this and that and whatever. Don't ever do that. You have to do the thing where it's all one piece of bread together, where I don't know what oven somewhere, they just wheel in a truck or whatever it is that has like this like football field sized oven in it that they can make this giant piece of bread. But it is all one long continuous piece of bread. And no matter what, that one long continuous piece of bread would feed my entire group. And not only would it feed my entire group, it would feed anybody else we had. Because it doesn't make sense mathematically that if we try to do the like individual sandwiches, the individual bread, the individual meat and everything else, we would run out of something in the middle of that somewhere. And you'd have to like fight to find another thing or figure it out with other things. But the giant bread version would always have some left over. In fact, one time when we were downtown, we had so much left over, we just went back out on the street and walked around the block and found people that were living on the street and said, hey, here's some sandwich. And we gave enough away to feed everybody we saw, and then still had some left over because it's the magic of the giant bread sandwich. Somehow, there's always enough. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And it was definitely a God-blessed thing every time. He has some sort of favoritism toward the whole bread sandwich. I've learned a lot of lessons from those giant subs. Very powerful lessons from party subs. And these lessons play out very directly in the 2 words that make up the sandwich for today. And those 2 words are grace and people. Grace and the people. So later in this message, I'm going to be giving you my lessons. I'll share with you the lessons I have learned about grace from a giant sub. But I want you to just hold on to that and get excited for it. It'll be the closure of the sermon. Before we do any of that, because this is a word-based sermon, everything has been word-based, I am going to give you some definitions. And this is a really fun one to define because these words are really special words in different ways. First, grace, which we all have heard the word grace. The word grace appears all over the New Testament, the Old Testament, it's everywhere. In the New Testament, whenever it's translated grace into English, it's always from this Greek word charis. Almost every single book in the New Testament and every single chapter in Romans, this word charis appears. It's where we get charismatic from, charisma. It's all from the space root word. It literally means an extension toward, like a reaching out in the direction of a person. And that extension toward could be then understood as favor, like showing favor toward someone, or loving kindness to someone. You're extending it toward. That's charis. We as Christians have a lot of experience with this word, and yet it's still very easy for us to forget how special it is. That a gift like that, a gift of something being extended toward you, is never required. It should never be assumed. Favors are always at the discretion of the one giving the favor, and grace should not be something that we just take for granted. This is a video of our driveway. This is a Ring camera we have attached to the front of our house. So you can look out and see when people are wandering around across the street or whatever, because sometimes it happens. And then it'll give a notice saying, hey, there's somebody in your driveway, and you can go look and see that there's somebody in your driveway. This is the nighttime shot, and because of the position of where this is out in the corner of the house, it's a really, really ideal spot for spiders. Spiders love to just kind of get in that corner and trap stuff. And you can see off to the right, there's a little bit of a web dangling there that the spiders come in and they just sort of linger around in this corner and they put in their webs, hoping to get their little treats. And about once a month, the view becomes more like this, which I can't do anything with. Can you hit the next one? Yes. Can't do anything with that. That camera angle is totally useless to me. And with this unusable footage, I'm left I've got to do something to fix it. And there are some people in our house who would look at that spider and what that spider has done and immediately go out and squash it and possibly set it on fire, set the whole house on fire, I don't even know, in order to make this spider pay for the fact that it has blocked the camera. I am not this person because I am gracious towards spiders. I probably to a fault am more gracious than I should be. I will admit if there's one in the house and she's got a problem with it, I will do something about that spider. Typically she's the one that does it because I would rather scoop it on a piece of paper and let it go back outside. I don't have a reason to squash them. They're not really bothering me. But this one is, in a way, bothering me. This spider is doing something that does personally affect me, right? So I have this warranted reason I could possibly go and squash this thing, right? I could be like, hey, no, spider, stop putting this web in my view so I can't see the car there. Because right now you can't see that car. It's Owen's car, and it's not there now, so it's probably better that the web is covering it. I don't have to think about the fact that Owen's car is not there and make me sad and all that. But I'm not going to do that. Instead, what I will do is just go clear out the web around the camera and let the spider just stay as it is. So I'm giving an extension of a favor to the spider. I could squash the spider so that there's no more web from spider. But I'm saying to spider, you continue to choose whether you're going to put your web there. I will continue to let you make that choice. But for now, I'm just going to clear away this web. Do you see the connection there? I'm giving a level of grace to the spider. And it's his decision to make whether he makes another web in my way, and whether that time is enough where I say, nope, judgment's coming down on you now, or do I just clear it out again, and I let him go? I'm allowing him the chance to learn the lesson, whether he does or not, and the chance to keep going. That's grace. That's charis. Pretty straightforward. The second word, though, a little more complicated because there are so many words in the New Testament that are translated as people. The first two, which are very common ones, we have aklos and plethos. Both of these words are used more to describe like a group of people, a general gathering or assembly of people. They are not used in the book of Romans, though. These two words never are translated into being people in Romans because these are more like narrative words. Like if you were to tell a story about people, like Jesus walked down the road and a crowd of people followed him. That crowd of people would be a plethos or an aklos. Paul's not telling stories. Paul's writing a letter where it's like giving a case for something. So Paul's not going to do it from this narrative perspective. So we don't have aklos or plethos in Romans. What we do have first, Paul uses the word anthropos. Anthropos is generally like human beings, humankind. There are several occurrences in the early parts of Romans where he uses anthropos to say people. And it's particularly for like chapters 5 and 6 where he says that all people or all of humankind has sinned. Those anthropos are us as just humans experiencing life as humans. And then he steps it up and he turns it from just being general humankind to a word that's more specific in laos. Laos is specifically like God's people. When something is described and translated as my people or God's people, it is laos. It is a group of people with a common bond, most specifically a bond of knowing God. And since Paul's audience is both Jews and Gentiles who know God, this is what you're going to see a lot. You're going to see laos as the word that he chooses to use to talk about people, because they are people that are part of a common group together that knows God. They are laos. But the final word, and this is where it gets really cool, the final word that's translated as people is hagios. Hagios is directly translated as different, but becomes an English word, people, to describe very, very specific people in a very specific condition. Hagios is for people who have been sanctified, consecrated, made holy. Something about them has changed to where they are now different people than they were. So up through chapter 11 of Romans, laos is used lots, and anthropos is used lots. Hey, people, you have sinned. And then, hey, people of God, you are a part of what can be made new. You can be made to make a choice. You are laos. And then in chapter 12, he flips it. Because in chapter 12, we have the beginning of the verse, of verse 1. We have that word therefore. Chapter 12, verse 1 of Romans begins with the word therefore, saying everything that Paul built up to in this point is a case that he is making for a conclusion in the word therefore. And then everything after the word therefore is going to be what should have happened therefore because of the things that were before it. So everything you were as a laos, everything you were as an anthropos, all of those things were built as a case up to 12:1. And then therefore, now you are different. Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, all that you know, everything that you have taken in because of your understanding of what God can do for you, offer your bodies as living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. So you are supposed to dedicate every ounce of your body, every ounce of your soul and your mind to the reaction of having this mercy, having this grace in your life. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Grace should transform us. Grace should make us go from laos to hagios. It should make us be different. It should make us stand out as being separated and consecrated toward a specific thing, to do his will. Paul made his case for this. He spent all of the first 11 chapters explaining, yes, we are sinners. Yes, we can all be God's people. And then he finishes the book by showing us what that reaction should be. We should be made different because of what God has extended toward us. The extension toward, the charis. Our acceptance of that gift should set us apart and make us consecrated as new beings. So now with all those understandings and all those definitions, now I'm going to teach you my lessons, my party sub lessons that involve grace and the people. And you can make whatever notes you want to make, whether they're notes about how you should make your own party sub or whether they're notes about how you should understand grace. I don't care, because it's all going to mix together in the end. It'll all get digested one way or another. Grace is not an ingredient. It is not one piece of the sandwich. It is an entire slice of the whole sub. Typically, a party sub is made with the intention of feeding a large group of people and ensuring that no one's going to be left hungry. It's excessive by design, overflowing with ingredients and flavors, and God's grace is abundant in that same way. It's abundant beyond measure. Paul writes in Romans 5:20, where sin increased, grace increased all the more. That this statement reflects the boundless and inexhaustible nature of God's grace. It's abundant. It's increasing when it needs to increase. There's enough to make it work. And it's not just one little part of it, it's an entire slice of it. No matter how much sin exists or how deep our brokenness runs, God's grace is always greater and more fully sufficient to cover it. A party sub, in a way, seems like it could never run out. And for me, personally, they never did run out. I never had a party sub where I didn't have part of it that got thrown away at the end because it was like 5 days in the fridge and it was soggy and just like, I can't anymore. There's always going to be enough for everyone somehow, and it goes around. In a similar fashion, God's grace never depletes. No matter how many people draw from it, it is not ration or limited to a select few, but endlessly available to all who come. Ephesians 1, 7 and 8 says, "In him we have the redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins, in accordance with the riches of God's grace, which he lavished on us." Lavished on us. The word lavished evokes an image of overflowing abundance, a pouring out of a giant sub of grace. No scarcity, no limitation. Grace doesn't require work. It's just gifted. It's available. Ephesians 2, 8 and 9. We should probably make this Ephesians sandwiches too, because I keep quoting a lot of Ephesians as well. "For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast." You don't have to assemble it. You're not given the parts of it and say, "Here, there's the mayonnaise jar. Go find a plastic knife and go over here and get your cheese." There's no work for this. Here is the sub. Slice it, enjoy it. No work needed. Freely offered to anyone who believes without the requirement to earn or deserve it. Just as a partygoer doesn't need to contribute payment to partake in the meal, believers receive grace purely because of God's generosity. No one qualifies for grace by their own merit. Rather, it is a gift extended to all, despite our shortcomings. That's what a party sub is. And there's nothing that spider could do. That spider could do no extra work at all for me to change what I'm going to do toward him. I'm deciding whether to give him the grace to let him continue. He cannot write little fancy words like, "Hey, Shawn, you're the best." None of that will do anything except maybe I'll put it on YouTube. Like I've got my own Charlotte's Web thing going on. He can't do anything. There's no work that changes grace. Grace is the same for all. And this goes back to that. Remember, it's got to be the whole big long piece of bread. It can't be tiny broken up pieces of bread. It is the same for all. And Romans 11:16 helps us to remember that because it talks about dough. I mean, it's sort of in the Jews and Gentiles thing, but it helps keep this whole connection. If the part of the dough offered as first fruits is holy, then the whole batch is holy. The entire stretch of the bread is holy. If the root is holy, so are the branches. It's for everyone. And we had an entire sermon last week about Jews and Gentiles. And Romans 3:22 through 24, we capture this totally by saying, and by the statements that are in that from what Paul says. "This righteousness is given through faith in Christ Jesus to all who believe. There is no difference between Jew and Gentile. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." Paul's emphasizing that we need grace, and grace is available. Like, I'm going to call you out as a sinner. You broke the law. You can be made righteous apart from that law. It doesn't matter what you are, Jew or Gentile. It is for everyone who wants to partake. Here's the sandwich on the table. Take a slice. We're drawn together as a community through that. There is communal nature in the fact that we are all sharing in this same grace, this same sandwich together. Ephesians 2:14 through 16. I'm going to read it up here. "For he himself is our peace, who has made the two groups one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, by setting aside in his flesh the law with its commands and regulations. His purpose was to create in himself one new humanity out of the two, thus making peace, and in one body to reconcile both of them to God through the cross, by which he put to death their hostility." I know a few of these scriptures are like we've used them from the other weeks. It's something that can just be hammered down on you that this is what God has for us. This is the sandwich that is available for us to take. This is what will make us be made righteous. Apart from any other laws, apart from any of the things that make us who we are or not make us who we are, we together can all experience this grace as one body together. And finally, the effect of that party sub is that we're all full. We're all made full. Every single person that comes to that table that chooses to eat of this sandwich, they are all made full from it, completely satisfied, and therefore capable of appreciating the gift in its entirety because they got to enjoy a part of it. We can process that. We can process all that we've learned from 4 weeks of learning about sandwiches and hot dogs, same thing, and from tiny sandwiches and the sin that's connected to them, and then from the individual ingredients that hold a sandwich together, from the law and from the righteousness. We can learn all these lessons as one thing together. We are made righteous apart from the law. We are set free from sin and death. We are all God's people, whether Jew or Gentile. And we've been given an incredible gift if we choose to accept it.